The table was set the way it always was at the Whitfield house, fine china that never saw the dishwasher, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight like little fires, and a silence underneath all of it that felt older than the furniture. Sandra had driven 4 hours for this dinner. She'd taken a half day from work, pressed her dress the night before, and brought a bottle of wine that cost more than she usually spent on groceries in a week. She wanted this to go well. She always wanted it to go well. She was 34, and she had built something real. Not inherited, not handed down built. Sandra Cole had started her interior design firm, Meridian Studio, out of a 1-bedroom apartment 6 years ago with a laptop, a secondhand drafting table, and a stubbornness that her mother had always called a character flaw. Now she had 12 clients, a small team of 4, and a profile in a regional design magazine that sat on her nightstand because some nights she needed to be reminded that the hard parts had been worth it. None of that mattered at the Whitfield dinner table. Her older brother, Derek, sat at the far end with his wife, Camille, who wore the specific smile of someone always keeping score. Her mother, Patricia, moved between the kitchen and the table with the practiced efficiency of a woman who believed hosting was a form of performance. Her father, Gerald, sat at the head of the table the way he always did, like a man waiting to be agreed with. Sandra poured the wine she'd brought. No one commented on it. Derek's firm just landed the Hargrove account, Patricia announced, setting down the roasted carrots. $42 million. Everyone looked at Derek. Derek looked at the table with false modesty, which was its own kind of arrogance. "That's wonderful," Sandra said, and she meant it. She meant it completely. "And Sandra," Camille said, tilting her wine glass slightly, Sandra's wine in Sandra's glass, "are you still doing the decorating thing?" The table didn't go quiet. That was the worst part. No one even flinched. "Interior design," Sandra said carefully. "Yes. We just finished a commercial project downtown. The Alderman building renovation." "I think I read something about that," her father said, cutting his meat. "Wasn't there a complaint about the budget overrun?" Sandra set down her fork. "There was a change order from the client. That's standard." "Still," he said, not finishing the sentence. He never finished those sentences. He just dropped them like stones and watched to see if she'd drown. And then Derek laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, which somehow made it worse. It was a dismissive laugh, the kind you give a child who says something accidentally funny without understanding why. "Sandra, come on. You've been grinding at this for what, 6 years? You're smart. You could have gone into finance, gone corporate. The decorating thing is cute, but..." He shrugged. "Is it actually paying the bills? Or are you still doing that freelance patchwork thing?" Camille touched her husband's arm, not to stop him, to encourage him. The gesture was barely visible, but Sandra saw it. She had always been the one who saw things clearly. "The firm is profitable," Sandra said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that later. Sure, Derek said. Patricia came back to the table and sat down. "We just worry about you, honey. You've always been so independent. Sometimes it reads as stubborn." Sandra looked around the table, her father staring at his plate, her brother already moving on to another subject, Camille refreshing her own glass first, then setting the bottle down. The candles flickered once, as if even the light was uncomfortable. And Sandra understood, with the cold clarity of something she had been refusing to see for years, that this family did not see her. They had never seen her, and they never would unless she made them. She cried in the car before she'd even left the driveway. Not the clean, cinematic kind of crying, the ugly, airless kind, where you press your forehead against the steering wheel and make sounds you don't recognize as yourself. She sat there for 6 minutes. Then she drove home. The next morning, she told herself it was just one dinner. Families were complicated. Derek was competitive. Her father had always been cold. These were facts she'd been managing her whole adult life, and she had managed them. She went to work. She answered emails. She got on with it. Then came the Alderman building review. 3 weeks after the dinner, Sandra received a call from Marcus Hargrove, not Alderman. This was a different project she'd been pitching for 8 months. A boutique hotel renovation in the Arts District that would have been the largest contract in Meridian Studios history. She'd been told she was the frontrunner. She'd already begun preliminary concept boards. Marcus told her, with genuine seeming regret, that they'd decided to go another direction. Another direction turned out to be Whitfield Plus Associates, Derek's firm. She didn't understand it at first. The numbers didn't make sense. Derek's firm didn't do hospitality interiors. They were commercial architects, structural, not aesthetic. It wasn't their lane. It took Sandra 2 weeks, in a quiet conversation with a former colleague, at a mutual contractor, to understand what had happened. Her father, Gerald Whitfield, sat on the advisory board of Hargrove Capital, the parent company behind the hotel project. He had, in a conversation she would never be able to prove, suggested that the Hargrove family take another look at the bids. He had mentioned, in whatever careful language men like him used, that Sandra's firm was ambitious but perhaps not ready for something of this scale. His own daughter. She sat at her drafting table the night she confirmed this, and she didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She just sat there in the dark of her studio and felt something inside her go very, very still. The weeks that followed were brutal in the quiet way that the worst things are. She lost 2 smaller clients. Word spread, the way it always did in tight professional circles, that Meridian Studio had been passed over for Hargrove. In this industry, perception was everything. Being passed over was contagious. One of her 4 employees, Jess, gave notice in March. Not unkindly, Jess had a family, needed stability. Sandra understood. She told Jess she understood, closed her office door, and sat on the floor for a while. She called her mother once, not to say anything accusatory, just to talk. Patricia spent 11 minutes discussing Derek's upcoming anniversary party, the venue they'd chosen, the guest list. When Sandra said she was struggling, her mother said, "You've always been so sensitive, Sandra. You get that from my side of the family." Sandra hung up and didn't call again. The worst night came in April. She was going through financials at midnight, the kind of numbers that tell you exactly how much runway you have left, and she found herself genuinely uncertain if the firm would survive the year. The realization didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as something quieter and more devastating, the thought that maybe they had been right. Maybe she had been foolish. Maybe stubborn really was the same thing as stupid, and she had just taken 6 years to learn it. She almost believed it. She sat with that thought for exactly 1 night. In the morning, she woke up early, made coffee, and opened her laptop. Not to look at the financials, to look at everything else. She stopped calling them. That was the first decision. Not dramatically. No speech, no confrontation, no angry text message sent at 2 a.m. She simply stopped initiating. If they reached out, she answered in short, civil sentences. She wished Derek a happy birthday in April with a 2-line message. She responded to her mother's Easter invite with a polite conflict. She was never rude, she was never cold, she was simply unavailable. The energy she had spent for 34 years managing their perceptions of her, softening herself to fit their comfort, she took all of that back. And she used it. She began waking at 5:30 every morning, not because some productivity article told her to, but because the early morning hours felt like territory that belonged only to her. She read, she studied. She reached out to former professors, to designers she admired, to architects in other cities she'd never had the confidence to approach. She was honest in those conversations, in a way she'd never allowed herself to be before. "I'm rebuilding. I want to learn from people who are better than me." People responded to that honesty. Most of them did, anyway. She also hired a lawyer not for anything aggressive, not yet, just to understand her options, to understand what it would mean if a board member had influenced a bid process for personal reasons. The lawyer, a careful woman named Diane, told her it would be nearly impossible to prove and expensive to pursue. Sandra nodded, thanked her, and paid the consultation fee. She wasn't thinking about lawyers. She had started thinking about the Alderman project differently, not as a loss, but as a case study. The renovation had been completed by a firm brought in after her. She had seen photographs. She knew, with professional certainty, that what she had proposed was better, more historically sensitive, more commercially viable, more beautifully considered. She wrote up the full proposal, Not to send anywhere, just to have it. Documentation of her vision, her process, her reasoning. She made it meticulous. She made it beautiful. Then she started researching the Hargrove Hotel project, the one that had gone to Derek's firm. She read the public filings, the architectural permits, the planning board approvals. She attended 2 open city council sessions where the project came up. She said nothing. She listened. And in September, at a regional design conference in Austin, she met a woman named Claire Oates. Claire was the development director for a national hospitality group called Selene Collection, 12 boutique hotels across the American South and Southwest, with plans to expand into the Northeast. Sandra learned over 2 glasses of wine and a long conversation about mid-century influences in modern commercial space, frustrated with her current design partners. Sandra listened more than she talked. She asked good questions. She did not mention her family once. When Claire asked for her card, Sandra felt something shift in her chest. Not excitement, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like patience, finally being rewarded. She drove back to her hotel room and sat by the window for a long time, looking at the city lights below, thinking about the difference between impulsive action and deliberate motion. The first one feels like relief. The second one feels like power. She spent 4 months on the Selene proposal. 4 months of 5:30 mornings and late studio nights, of revision and refinement, of flying to visit 3 of their existing properties on her own dime, just to understand the aesthetic language of what they'd already built. She brought on a structural consultant, a lighting specialist, and a young architect named Priya whose talent she had been quietly tracking for 2 years. The proposal she sent to Claire Oates in January was 68 pages. It was the best work Sandra had ever done. Not because she was trying to prove something to someone else, because she was finally making something without the background noise of other people's doubts. Claire called her on a Tuesday morning. "I want to show this to our CEO," she said. "This is not how we usually do things, but this is not a usual proposal." The contract that followed was worth $4.3 million, 4 properties, full design scope, a 2-year engagement with option to extend. Sandra signed the paperwork on a Wednesday evening, alone in her studio, with a glass of whiskey she'd been saving for something she hadn't named yet. She took a photograph of the signed pages and put her phone face down on the desk. She didn't post it. She didn't tell anyone. She went back to work. But she had one more thing to do. It required no confrontation, no raised voices, no dramatic revelation. It required only time and visibility, both of which she now had. The Selene project launched publicly in April with a feature in Architectural Digest. Not a regional magazine, not a trade blog. Architectural Digest. They'd asked to profile Sandra specifically. The story of Meridian Studio. The philosophy behind the work. The journalist, thorough and good, had done his research. He had found the Alderman Building project. He had found the original proposal Sandra had filed, the one she had made meticulous and beautiful for exactly this kind of moment. The article ran on a Thursday. Sandra knew, because she had been raised in this family, that her father read Architectural Digest. She knew that Derek's firm subscribed at the office. She knew Camille would see it on Instagram within hours, because she followed 3 of the accounts that shared that kind of coverage. She sent 1 copy of the magazine, physical, no note, to her parents' address. That was all. She had no interest in watching their faces. She did not need that. What she needed, what she had spent 14 months building, was a record that could not be dismissed, could not be called a decorating thing, could not be laughed off with a shrug at a dinner table. She had made something undeniable. And the people who had tried to make her doubt it would have to live with it now, quietly, in whatever way small people live with, having been wrong about someone they underestimated. Her father called in May. She almost didn't answer. She looked at his name on the screen for 4 rings and thought about the version of herself who would have picked up immediately, grateful for any contact, ready to be warm and accommodating and careful. She answered on the 5th ring. "I saw the article," he said. "I know." A silence. Her father was not practiced at this kind of silence, the kind where he wasn't in control of the pause. "It was very impressive," he said. She waited. "Your mother and I thought." He cleared his throat. "We'd like to have dinner, soon, if you're available." She said she'd check her calendar. She was polite. She was not warm. She did not go to that dinner. She went instead to a lunch meeting with Claire and the Solène CEO, where they discussed extending the contract to 2 additional properties. After the meeting, she sat in her car and called Jess, the employee, who had given notice the year before, and offered her a position with a salary that was honest about what her work was worth. Jess cried a little. Sandra let her. That week, she also learned something she had not expected. A mutual contact in the development world told her, casually, over coffee, that the Hargrove Hotel project, the one that had gone to Derek's firm, had gone significantly over budget and was now 18 months behind schedule. There were change order disputes. There were structural concerns. The Hargrove family, her contact said, was quietly furious. Sandra had not arranged this. She had not engineered it. She had simply stepped back and let Derek's firm be exactly what it was, a structural firm doing work outside its competency, backed by a father's phone call instead of actual capability. She felt something unexpected then. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more complicated. She had spent over a year believing that what she wanted was for them to understand what they had done. But sitting in that coffee shop, hearing that Derek's borrowed opportunity was collapsing under its own weight, she realized she didn't feel victorious. She felt tired, and strangely sad not for herself, but for the version of this family that could have existed if any of them had been different. She thought about her father's phone call. It was very impressive. Those were the 4 words she had spent her whole life waiting for. And now that they had come, they arrived too late and too small, like rain after a fire. She drove back to her studio. Priya was at her desk, working. The afternoon light came through the windows the way it always did at this hour, filling the space with something golden and quiet. Sandra stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at it. This place she had built. This work that was entirely hers, earned without anyone's phone call or favor or borrowed credibility. She sat down at her drafting table and opened the next project file. She never sent her father a response about the dinner invitation. She never explained herself, never delivered a speech, never itemized the damage. There was no climactic confrontation, no table turned in a crowded restaurant. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the moment when the people who hurt them finally understand. Sandra had stopped waiting. She had started building instead. Because the most devastating thing you can do to people who never believed in you is not to destroy them. It is to become quietly and completely everything they told you that you couldn't.